One thing I love about summer is how easy everything feels. The days are a little more relaxed, and I find myself reaching for the same comfortable, go-anywhere pieces again and again. That's why I keep coming back to Quince. They focus on well-made essentials that naturally become those everyday staples you actually live in all season long. This ad may sound a little different because I'm recording it from Zaragoza, Spain, and I brought with me my new Quince Clubhouse golf shorts. And these are definitely going to be one of those comfortable pieces that I wear all summer. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman, so you're paying for exceptional quality, not brand markup. And it's not just clothing. Quince has become a trusted favorite for everything from home to travel to everyday essentials. Make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/traveler for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Evening. Buyer's remorse. Buy a new car? I'll be moving in. Let's get started.
Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I bought it from Carvana.
You what?
Yeah, great price. I even have 7 days to love it or return it.
So there's no...
No buyer's remorse. More like buyer's rejoice.
I guess I'll let myself out. Congratulations. I mean it.
Buyer's rejoice. Buy your car today on Carvana.
Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Amateur Traveler, episode 1005. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about cathedrals, castles, and canyoneering, Garnacha and gastronomy, a palace, and the Pyrenees as we go to the region of Aragon in Spain. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Aragon. This is another episode about my travels. I'll be joined later on by two of my traveling companions. I was on a press trip in Aragon in Spain. You may say, Chris, you were just in Spain, and that is true. I actually went on 2 press trips in Spain this year. Patricia from the tourism office wanted to have me back this year. And when she asked me what region I was interested in going to, one of the places I said is I was interested in getting to the city of Zaragoza. We did an episode on Zaragoza a while back on Amateur Traveler, episode 784. And that one really resonated with me, so I've been wanting to get there since then. As we started talking about it, she said, would I also be interested in heading up to one of the national parks, which is in the Pyrenees? This is the National Park Parque Nacional de Ordesa y Monte Perdido. It looked pretty. I said yes. It was one of the best parts of the trip, but I also did not know what I was getting myself into, and you'll hear more about that coming up. Let's start with where Aragon is, because my geography of this wasn't exactly perfect. So we started in the city of Zaragoza, as I mentioned, which is about halfway between Madrid and Barcelona, a little further north of Barcelona, and that's one of the things that tricked me. And the province of Aragon is to the left, to the west of the province of Catalonia, where Barcelona is in, and it goes all the way up to the French border, and we went all the way up to the French border. We didn't do all of the southern part of the province, and there's a lot more to see than you can see in 1 week, which was all that we had there. We started the city of Zaragoza, and that is the 4th largest city in Spain. It doesn't get as much tourists, at least doesn't get a lot of foreign tourists as other cities. Our first couple nights in Aragon were at the Hotel Silken Reino de Aragon, which was right on the border between the new city and just outside of what would have been the walled city. This city goes back to Roman times. We were actually only 2 blocks from a Roman theater where the hotel is. The first afternoon that we were there in the city, we went into the new part of town, which is a lovely city. Really, we were in a shopping area, and if you're there for the shopping, there's a couple different Corte Inglés and some other wonderful shops. I was a little more interested in 2 historic things that we did. First one is we went to a bank. Well, that itself doesn't sound historic. This is the Ibercaja Bank, and at their headquarters in the new part of town, there is the recreation of a courtyard of the Infanta, or the Patio de la Infanta. And this was a Renaissance-style palace in the area that was built in the mid 1500s. It has since been destroyed, but this courtyard portion of the palace was taken apart and has been reconstructed here in this bank. And so you can see what this wealthy courtyard of a merchant and banker would have looked like. Very interesting. And there were many such palaces in the city that didn't survive to modern times. Currently, in the basement of the bank, there is a Goya exhibit because the Goya Museum in the Old Town was under renovation. So both of those were very interesting. Goya, prominent artist who is associated with Zaragoza. Some of his very disturbing sketches from the Spanish Civil War were on display down there. The other place that we went of historic significance is the Basilica of Santa Engracia. And Santa Engracia was an early Christian martyr. And remember, this was a Roman city, and she died probably during the persecution of Christians under Diocletian. She and some other martyrs. There are 4th century sarcophagi in the crypt of this church that date back to that time period. That night, we went to a fun neighborhood. So just inside the old walls of the city, the walls are gone, by the way, but where they used to be is a neighborhood that is known for its tapas bars. And this actually is a lovely little shopping area and tapas bar area called El Tubo, and an older neighborhood. For our welcome dinner, we went to a restaurant called Montal, and this is a restaurant and a shop and a wine shop and has a museum in the basement as well. Museo de la Torre Nueva, Museum of the New Tower, which is dedicated, of course, to an old tower that doesn't exist anymore. This was a clock tower built in the early 1500s and demolished in the late 1800s because it had a lean to it. This was the Leaning Tower of Zaragoza, if you will. The museum documents the tower, but we did not get a chance to visit it. We had your typical Spanish dinner, which means it's lighter. Quite often, the heavier meal of the day is in the middle of the day, traditionally. And of course, it was late. And I was just coming in from Paris, so I was on that time zone. But I had 4 other tired journalists who were trying to adjust to the time zone as we stayed out till at least 11 o'clock at night. During our dinner with the tourism rep from Zaragoza, we learned a few things. We learned that they were the home for the Garnacha grape. If you're not familiar with that, you probably have heard it called Grenache if you're a wine lover. And they have a number of festivals, including the Grenache Wine Festival in June, the Medieval Festival in June, the Flower Festival in May, the Jazz Festival in November, and a music festival in June. And then the larger festival is the Fiesta del Pilar in October that has to do with the Virgin of Pilar, which I will get to. We also learned that 25% of the fruits and vegetables in Spain come from the region of Aragon. I did not know that. Very agricultural area. And as we walked through all of those tapas restaurants, that some of them are particularly known for Mudéjar tapas. And these are tapas that are inspired by the culinary traditions, influenced by Muslim culture. And so you're not going to find ham in those, for instance, but you're going to find lamb and almonds and pine nuts, raisins, figs, those sorts of things. So check that out when you're in that El Tubo area. And we learned to look for restaurants that had awards from Solis Repsol. And so this is like Michelin stars, but they go from 1 to 3 soles or suns. And this is a local guide for restaurants in Spain. The other thing we learned about but did not get to is the Monastery de Piedra, which is in between Zaragoza and Madrid. And this is traditionally considered the first place in Europe where chocolate was prepared and consumed. Seems like we should have done a pilgrimage there, but we did not. The next day, we toured more in the old part of Zaragoza, and that for me is really the highlight of the city. We toured some sweet shops. The tourism board has a €15 pass with 5 tickets to different sweet shops in the city, and we toured some of those. It is an area known for sweet shops. We also toured the Roman theater. So this theater is not a complete theater like you'll see in some other places. It's the ruins of a theater. It's not used for concerts still, but it's one of 4 different Roman museums that you can find in the city. In addition to the theater, you'll see maps of what the city looked like when it was a Roman city, and other information about life in Roman Zaragoza. Wasn't called Zaragoza at the time, but instead the name was Caesar Augusta, named after Emperor Augustus and founded in 14 AD. We walked by the outside of some of the Renaissance palaces, like the one that was preserved that we'd seen the day before. There's only 20 left in the town. There were 200 before the Peninsular War, so before the French invaded during the Napoleonic Wars. During that time, Zaragoza opposed Napoleon, and there was a lot of damage done to Zaragoza in the fighting against Napoleon's forces. There's one UNESCO designation that's associated with Zaragoza, and that's the multi-site Mudéjar architecture of Aragon. So Mudéjar, that style of architecture that is Muslim-influenced Christian buildings, in this case coming from later on, from 12th to 17th century. And there are three places in Zaragoza that are associated with that. One is the palace, which we would get to the next day. And the other is the parish church of San Pablo, which is west of the Central Market a couple blocks, and we didn't get there. But the detailed tile work on the tower looks like someplace that I wish I had seen. And then the other place is the parish and the dome of La Seo. La Seo being the older of the two cathedrals in Zaragoza. And just the outer wall of that cathedral, the wall that's closest to the river, is just this beautiful Mudéjar style tile and detail work. If you're not familiar with this, it tends to have a lot of intricate geometric patterns, because obviously the Muslim style would have been don't use any depictions of things in heaven or earth. And so a lot of geometry there that carries over into this Mudéjar style. So quite a beautiful, especially the outer work of La Seo. Had a chance to visit inside. It is a gold-filled cathedral. A lot of money went into this cathedral. One of the interesting things is it has been renovated in recent years, and they left one particular chapel unrenovated, and you could just see how black everything was from centuries of candles and flames in this before they switched to electric lights. And it's very interesting that they decided to do that, to leave one section so that you could see the difference. And so it's a very classic Gothic cathedral, unlike the other cathedral in town, which is the Cathedral Basilica of Our Lady of the Pillar. Catedral de Nuestra Señora del Pilar. And the Lady of the Pillar thing needs some explanation here. There is a story that James the Greater, James son of Zebedee, one of the apostles in the Bible, was here in Spain in roughly 40 AD and needed some help trying to convert people, and prayed, and the Virgin Mary appeared to him standing on a stone pillar, accompanied by angels. This was unusual because Mary is still believed to be alive, and so she's somehow co-located, and then he continues his mission, builds a chapel, and leaving the pillar as a sign. And so there's this small pillar with a small Mary on top of it. The whole thing, the Mary maybe 12 inches tall, the pillar maybe 3 feet tall, around which this large and impressive cathedral is built. Now, I do have to say, since I have another podcast, which is the Bible Study Podcast, there's no evidence for any of this in the Bible. And it's much more likely from the biblical accounts that James stayed in Jerusalem, where he was executed around the year 44 AD. But impressive church, and there are also some Goya paintings here. Another unusual feature is that in the Spanish Civil War, some small bombs were dropped on the cathedral, and they have been left in place along with some of the bomb damage. It has 4 towers on the 4 corners. The whole church was built in 1681 to 1872, but the towers were added on much later in the 1900s. It is a massive church. It's the second largest in Spain from what I see, second to Sevilla, but it seems larger, and it's about the 9th or 10th largest church in the world. And I do recommend that you can go around the back to the riverside of the cathedral, and if you're facing it from the front, the left back tower has an elevator that you can take up and get a view of both the city as well as the top of the cathedral with some very intricate tile work there. Quite a beautiful building and a great view there from the top of the tower. You can take the elevator up a certain ways, and then if you have the mobility, you can do the spiral staircase even further up. But you'll get pretty much the same view, but a great view, and I highly recommend it. I also recommend going across the river and getting some views of the cathedral from there because it's hard to see the whole thing from the plaza in front of the cathedral. As we headed over to the Central Market, which is nearby, we passed by in the plaza in front of the cathedral a large fountain, and the fountain depicts Spanish Americas. And so you can see a waterfall there, but look closely and you'll see the shape of Mexico just off the fountain, and then the rest of Central America and South America depicted in this modern sculpture. We did do a quick visit to the Central Market. Beautiful place, lots of fresh food that you can find there. If you were staying in an apartment, this is someplace you might be interested in shopping if you're going to do your own cooking, but it's also just interesting to see and photograph in there. And then we did a great experience. This is the second time I did a cooking class in Spain, and this one was at La Zarola. And it was great fun. This cooking class was emphasizing cooking with Garnacha, with the wine that is originally from Aragon. And so we made, with some help and supervision, caramelized onion with goat cheese and Garnacha as an appetizer, and a cold almond soup with smoked sardines, not in mine, I will say, and red wine gelatin, and pork cheeks cooked in a Garnacha red wine with potatoes and apples, and then also dessert that I don't remember what it was, but it was great fun. If you haven't done a cooking class like this, I recommend it. This particular class starts at 49 euros and was enjoyed by all. And then our next outing was to the palace. And so the palace is the Aljaferia, which is the palace of, which just means the palace of Jafar, or Jafar if you're a Aladdin fan, and that is one of the last of the Muslim rulers in the 11th century, Abu Jafar Ahmad ibn Suleiman. And this is obviously a palace in the Muslim style, including a mosque in there, but it is a fortified palace. I mean, it looks like a castle. It is a castle with a keep inside as well as external walls and towers in it. And inside you'll find what you would expect to find in a Muslim palace, which is gardens and probably not as many probably not as many fountains as I've seen in other palaces, orange trees, and the very intricate style of architecture with the Muslim arches. With the Muslim arches that we'll see later mimicked in the Mudéjar style. But a very beautiful palace. And worth a visit. Inside the palace, there were artworks. There was a collection of artwork that goes back past the period of which this was an Islamic palace. And then look up and see some of the ceilings there, which are Mudéjar ceilings. And so they look like they were the original ones, but they have more intricate details that were added by the Christian rulers afterwards. The palace had a temporary Goya exhibit. Not sure how long that's going to be there, but some of the larger pieces of Goya, unlike what we saw in the bank. And then for dinner that night, we went to La Clandestina Bistro. So the secret bistro. It's not really that secret, but it is worth finding. We had a meal there that was a fixed price meal and fancy. It was a very good meal, and I would recommend that restaurant. It's right in the old town. It was right near our hotel. I won't tell you everything we had, but one of the things that we had for the main course was an Aragonese lamb. So this the Ternasco de Aragon, and that is a very traditional dish in Aragon. And that was our visit in Zaragoza. It did not disappoint. I would go I would I it was what I it did not disappoint. And let me bring in one of my fellow travelers to talk about his impressions of the city. I would like to welcome to the show Kevin Revolinski from themadtraveler.com. He is a freelance travel journalist, and Kevin joined me in Aragon. Kevin, welcome to the show first.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Chris. My initial impression of Zaragoza was that the first day it was all right. Seems nice, very laid back, not a lot of tourism, it seemed. We saw a few nice things and had a great dinner. I thought, God, I hope there's more than this. It's the fourth largest city. What am I going to tell people?
Right.
Like, why would I go here and not Madrid or Barcelona? And maybe you wouldn't. Maybe do this fourth. But the next day when we saw the two cathedrals, I was like, okay, no, this is definitely worthy of a good visit. Yeah, beautiful stuff.
I should say that when we visited, it was mid-June and it was hot. It was sort of 95 to 103 were the temperatures that I captured for the week that we were there in Zaragoza, or about 35 to 40 in Celsius. Now, it got cooler as we went up into the Pyrenees later on, but if you're doing this part of the trip, you might want to go in May or September instead of the heat of the summer. The next day, we headed out from Zaragoza, and it was going to be a wine day, but our first stop was at the Veruela Abbey, which is not that far outside of Zaragoza. And this is a Cistercian abbey that dates back to the 12th century. It is a fortified abbey. It really looks like a fortress as you're coming in. Probably the things that were most interesting to me as we were there, the inner cloister, really quite beautiful, and had heads of people you might see in the neighborhood, including one more up there on the top with a turban, as well as conquistadors and things like that. But inside that area, there was a stone where you could see outlines, for instance, of feet and some other measures. This was built at a time before standard measures. And apparently what would happen is you're building this, and you might be building it over generations. The person who starts this building may not finish it. The architect would inscribe these measures here. This is the measures we're going to use for this building. So it's probably an outline of the architect's feet, but that's what feet will be for this project. When I say I want this to be 20 feet, you're going to use this as a foot. So interesting. And then right near there were the graves of several of the abbots. And you could see with some of them, they were more ornate than others because these were abbots who came from noble families, and it might have a noble crest on it, for instance. I was struck by how large the church was here, because apparently this was just the church for the abbey, and the abbey never had that many people. So I couldn't quite figure out why it needed to be that large, but be that as it may. And then we headed off for the rest of the day to explore the wine regions around Zaragoza in Aragon. And there are four main, and I'm going to say DOs, or within Aragon. And so a DO is a domain of origin. So with wine, we talk about appellations, which are the geography that affects the style of the wine. So what kind of soil does it have? What kind of sun does it get? Is it on hills? And those sort of things. But in Europe and in Spain, there are also domain of origins, and this is a little more restrictive because a wine has to be from that particular region, but it also has to be made in that particular region. And we don't have anything like that. If you take a wine from a particular region in Napa and you bottle that in Monterey, it's still a Napa grape, and we just label it like that. So this is a little more restrictive. So the oldest of the DOs is south of Zaragoza. That's Caragena. It's known for its reds, especially Garnacha, Tempranillo, full-bodied wines. Caragena was Europe's City of Wine in 2025, so it's had some distinction. Campo de Borja, northwest of Zaragoza, is famous as the Empire of Garnacha. So this is the place where you often find old vine Garnacha reds. So some vines that might even be 100 years old. Oh, I say Garnacha red. I didn't mention that it is traditionally a red wine, but there is also Garnacha white, which was a naturally occurring mutation. So you can now find Garnacha whites as well. And this Campo de Borja area is really just literally the fields of Borja. So it's the fields around the town of Borja. And then you have Calatayud, southwest of Zaragoza. It's higher altitude. It's rugged terrain. It's also where you'd find a lot of Garnacha wines, but a little more fresher and minerally. And we did not get down to that area. And then Somotano in Huesca, and this is near the Pyrenees, and we're heading towards the Pyrenees for the rest of this trip. And this is more modern. These are newer vines here, and they have both French and Spanish grapes, including the familiar things like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, Chardonnay, and even some German wines like Gewürztraminer, but also Garnacha. We visited two wineries. The first one we visited was Aragoneses, and this is a larger winery. They have 3,500 hectares of wines, and it's a wine co-op. Both the two wineries we visited were wine co-ops. So this is 700 families who get together to make their wine together. We had a tour of the 3,500 different barrels they have in their barrel cellar, and then had a tasting of their wines. This would be a day where we tasted wines until my head started to spin just a little bit. But they have award-winning wines. Enjoyed quite a lot of them. One of my favorites was the Fagus, Fagus wine. And I didn't say, but this winery is in the Campo de Borja area. This is an old vine, high altitude red wine. The vines are 40 to 50 years old, which means that they have a more intense flavor, but they don't produce as much, so it's a little more expensive. But you can do a wine tasting here if you were to roll up. We know that because there was a couple that was on their honeymoon who were from the U.S. who rolled up at the same time we did and joined us for a wine tasting. The other winery we went to is Tierra de Cubas. The first winery was a little more in town, and this one was out on the countryside, and this is in the Carniena area with views of the hills. And in fact, they were actually going to be doing an eclipse party later in this year in 2026 when the eclipse comes through Aragon here, because they have great views of that part of the sky that you'd need. You can actually stay at this winery as well. They have, I think it's 5 different rooms, and it's a 4-star hotel. They're set up for events as well. Again, yet another co-op here, and this one of 562 different vineyards. And with both these wineries, one of the things that just struck me is, as somebody's coming from wine country, is the second winery, for instance, a lot of their bottles were like 650 euros. Maybe the most expensive one was 18 euros. So nothing really very expensive at this winery. And that is true for a lot of the wineries that I've been to in Europe. We might be able to get those wines here, but by the time you ship them and add tariffs, it's more expensive. The two wines of theirs that were memorable for me is they produce 1.5 million bottles of cava. That's their more expensive wine, a sparkling wine. We enjoyed that as we were touring. And then they also had a red blend that was 8.0.1, and that is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah. And the 3 different vineyards it comes from were planted in 2008, 2000, and 2001, which is where the name of the wine comes from. They were founded in 1956, and started making that 8.0.1 wine in 2016. We stayed that night in Huesca, in Hotel Pedro I of Aragon in Huesca, and I'll put a link in the show notes to my review of that hotel. I should say that Huesca is near some particularly famous rock climbing in Spain. It's near Mayos de Riglos, which is massive reddish towering rocks that go up to 300 meters or almost 1,000 feet. And so they are popular with rock climbers, and we stopped and took some pictures of those before we headed back to the hotel. The next day, which was Thursday, we started with a castle. This is the Castle Loire, and this is a Romanesque castle and abbey. and it's near the town of Loire in the Huesca province. And it dates back as old as the 11th century when it was first positioned here on what was at the time the frontier between Christian and Muslim lands. And then later on, as that frontier moved south, this was turned into a monastery. I just love touring an old castle. This one had outer walls and an inner keep and a chapel, and you could climb up in the towers, and it was positioned well up on a hill with views just for miles of the area here. You're in the foothills of the Pyrenees, and just a beautiful castle. And I enjoyed our visit to it. I've got pictures and videos that'll be coming out of the castle. We stopped briefly in the cafe and tried a braided pastry dessert that is popular in the region, and then went off to lunch, a very nice lunch, at the Asador de Fiscal. And this is a restaurant that's best known for its grilled meats and fish. And we ate outside with a view of the pool. There's a pool there, apparently, that you can swim in when you come to this restaurant. We thought perhaps they had a hotel, but that is not the case. Beautiful outdoor area. You can tell that this is an area that is popular with outdoor activities. So we're up in the Pyrenees by this point and doing a lot of mountain driving for the next 2 days, or at least Jorge, who is our tour guide and fixer, is doing a lot of mountain driving for us. And then that afternoon, we did one of two highlight activities, and this was with Miradores de Ordesa. So now we're now in Ordesa National Park, right in the Pyrenees, and we took a 4x4 up from about 800 meters in elevation to 2,100 meters in elevation. And it was a 4x4 because this was a rough road. It was a road there were sheep on, and it was a road that as we were driving up and I was sitting on the left-hand side, I had to sort of get over the fact that there was a sheer drop on my left for much of the drive. And then once we got there, we did a little hike. And I don't know if you can hear my air quotes there, that hiked up along an area, along a ridge, and then to a just dramatic view of the deepest canyon in Europe, a view on the other side of one of the tallest waterfalls in Europe, and views of the Pyrenees going all the way to the French border that we were very close to at this point. And I managed not to fall off the mountain, which is something that I tried a little bit. I am told by Cathy, who is standing behind me, that she would have put her foot on the rock that I put my foot on also, but it gave way. On our right, maybe 6 feet to our right, was a sheer drop-off, so we were staying away from that. But to my left, there was a fair degree of slope, and I managed not to roll down the hill and not to fall off the sheer cliff. I'm still a little sore from that part of the experience, but it was worth it. It was just a gorgeous hike, and I would highly recommend it. And I'll put a link to that outfitter in the show notes there, the Miradores de Ordesa, because I can certainly recommend this tour, and then they do a number of other tours as well. And Kevin mentioned this hike as one of his highlights.
Hiking or taking the 4x4 ride up into Ordesa Monte Perdido National Park, it wasn't a surprise in the sense that you get to the top and wow, it's an incredible 360-degree view of the Pyrenees. Fantastic,
right.
Gorgeous, beautiful. And
you can see all the way to France, which we're not that far from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I had friends that were actually in France the week before that on the other side, which is just a mere coincidence. But yeah, the view goes on for miles. You see these peaks. Some of them have snow on them. Gorgeous. And then, okay, we're going to have a little short hike. And so you leave the vehicle and you're walking along this narrow footpath that's got a smaller hill, really, I guess, about the top of the mountain we're on, a rounded grassy hill to the right, a little bit rocky. And I fall to chit-chatting with one of our guides, and I'm watching my steps so I don't slip and trip on a rock or something. And you come around the bend and you turn your head, and pazzow, this canyon opens up, this massive empty space, and across the way are these colorfully striped sandstone cliffs, like something out of the Grand Canyon or the Copper Canyon, because there is green things down further on the slopes, and a distant waterfall thinly dropping out of where a glacier used to rest centuries, thousands of years ago, whatever. That was a big reveal. Well done. The presentation was everything there. And you could have just stood staring at that for a very long time. And the birds were below you, circling. It was a bearded vulture, one of the largest ones in the world, that eats bones. So that was a nice touch, too.
I was just glad that I didn't end up being vulture food there with my misstep and trying to unsuccessfully fall down the mountain.
Yeah, it was a bit of a breathtaking show there. When you went down, I thought, what if he keeps rolling? But
that thought went through my mind as well.
I imagine so. But you recovered. You didn't need a hospital visit anyway. So
Not yet. Still a little sore, but
and a good thing because we didn't sign any waivers. So
yeah, it could be worse. On the right-hand side, 6 feet from us was a sheer drop?
Yeah. And I think
something like that, uphill just a little ways from it, so we weren't on the lip of it, but at least I fell the right direction.
Yeah, and I think the height of that peak was, in one of the pictures, it says 2,169 meters, so over 7,000 feet.
A lot.
Probably the canyon bottom was only maybe 5,000 feet, though.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The deepest canyon in Europe, we were told. So,
oh, there you have it. Yeah, no, it was great.
And you might think that was the most adventurous thing we did, but really that was pretty much eclipsed by the last full day of our trip when we did a canyoning experience. I would call it canyoneering here in the US, but in Spain it is canyoning. And I had done canyoneering once before in Jordan, where we hiked through a river and up the river to a waterfall, pulling yourself up through rapids and things like that. This was a little different, and the information came to us in a little bit in dribs and drabs in terms of what we would need. So at one point, it wasn't clear what kind of preparation we would need. I don't know if we knew that we were going to be wearing wetsuits right away as we were earlier in the week. The official itinerary we had just said canyoning level 1. Now, my understanding is we were originally supposed to do a more advanced canyoning, and that would not have been appropriate for the group that we had. One of the members of the group with the most seniority opted out, and that was probably just as well. The idea was to don wetsuits and go down a river. And you're donning wetsuits because this is apparently a snow-fed river. It is quite cold, and you're wearing helmets. We knew that, but then there was a question of, did we have shoes that we could use? Well, it turns out the answer is really no, and we weren't really sure what we needed. So Jorge did some work to try and figure out what was the right adventure for us, what was the right level, what did we need to bring, communicating with the guide so that they had everything we needed. We used Sally Adventures, and I'll put a link to them in the show notes. And a little critique here of Sally. Sally's English was not as strong as her Spanish, and as we were getting ready to do the adventure, I was not completely satisfied with the information we were getting. So at some point, we get our wetsuits and we don't put them on yet. And we put things in bags, or we put the wetsuits over people's shoulders, like in my case. And then we headed off, and it's like, well, where are we going? How far is the hike? What are we doing? And it might have been good if somebody had just said, okay, hang on a second here. We're going to hike up the river for about half an hour, and then we're going to hike down to the river, and then we're going to put on our wetsuits and get in the river and then go down the river. Just that information might have been useful to have. Once we got into the river, Sally and her other guide did an amazing job of getting us through this river, because sometimes you're just hiking, and that was actually quite hot. When you were in this wetsuit and you're hiking in the sun, you're quite warm, and got to be the point you wanted to jump back in the river, even though the water was quite cold, just to cool off. And then other times you are climbing up rocks or you are sliding down rocks. We had almost a little diaper on over the wetsuit to protect the wetsuit while we were sliding down rocks. At one point, we're sliding down rocks and then into a cave that's made of these big boulders that are going together, or we, or some of us, are jumping off of rocks into pools. And then at the end, we end up just laying back and doing the backstroke. and floating down the river. And that was probably the easiest part, but it was tiring. I would say about halfway through, my legs felt like lead. I know I had extra water in my wetsuit that I was lifting up. We were all glad we had done it, but if we had known what we were getting into, as you will hear from Cathy and Kevin, who I was with, we might not have done it, but you should. So let me introduce Cathy. I'd like to welcome one of my fellow travelers, Cathy Bennett Kopf, daily editor and writer for She Buys Travel, which you can find at shebuystravel.com. It's a leading digital platform for women travelers. Cathy, welcome to Amateur Traveler.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris. I'm really happy to discuss wild, wonderful Aragon today.
You say wild and wonderful Aragon. What was your highlight?
So many highlights. I'll give you the big one. Again, I think it probably, for those of us who participated in the activity, I think it's the one that stands out, was the canyoning adventure. It's something that in my day-to-day, I'm very rarely asked to don a wetsuit and descend into a river canyon to then boulder and pool jump and backstroke. It was quite something. It was just an out-of-world experience, and those are the ones that then cement a location for me as a must-visit or a bucket list tick mark. I don't know how much of the detail of the canyoning, I'm assuming you're going to go into it on your...
We've talked about it somewhat by this point, but I thought it was interesting that the mountain village we went to, Alcazar, that the tourism there was really all tied into this canyoning originally.
Exactly. It was fascinating to me that this was something the French really kicked off in the 70s, right? So they're active adventurers. They're coming over the Pyrenees and disappearing into these canyons to do the Via Ferrata, to do rock climbing, to do this steep mountain hiking, and then this canyoning, which I had never heard of. And anytime I've described it now since we've returned to people, they've never heard of it. This is something different.
I had actually done it before in Jordan.
Good for you.
No wetsuits because I was in Jordan and it was warmer. And although I was wearing more than apparently some of the French people were wearing when they started it 50 years ago, who were doing this naked, which I don't know why one
even
would
more
do
dangerous.
that. That whole slide down the rock thing would just take on a whole different perspective.
Exactly. So, not going to lie, those first wriggling into the wetsuit, taking the 20 minutes, I think at one point I asked people to help jump me into the suit, like holding the back, and I was jumping up and down trying to get it comfortable, which it never was, and how heavy it got as we progressed through the canyon. What were we in the water around 2.5 hours, I think? Yeah. And by the end, I was literally picking up my leg and moving it physically over the boulders because it was so heavy.
And we were doing the beginning one.
Yes. Very challenging. Again, if I had watched a video, I think, or had somebody take me through step by step, it's something I probably would have backed out of, but I'm so glad. The guides were wonderful and encouraging. I felt supported throughout, not only from the guides, but again, having the cheerleading from the group made it possible. Because there were times there, my heart was really racing from both fear and adrenaline, excitement. So I needed everybody to keep me moving. And what a great feeling, especially stripping off that wetsuit and having the first glass of wine. I think I went with a beer for lunch afterwards. But that was the big highlight. That was really monumental for me.
And not surprisingly, Kevin also had this as a highlight. And what was your highlight from Aragon?
Oh, I had several. I've narrowed it down to 3, I would say, that were above and beyond the rest of the experiences. Although pretty much most of what we did throughout that week was memorable and I would recommend people to do. But one of the surprising activities was the canyoning, or as we would call it in the United States, canyoneering. None of us, I think, were prepared mentally for what we were about to do. We didn't have a clear mission, how it was going to work. Even the instructions, though they were in Spanish first and we were waiting for translation, our guide, Sally, spoke so quickly that just the speed of her pronunciation made me feel anxious. Oh my God, what's going on? But getting in the water, and I thought, well, okay, fine. We've got all this equipment on. It's thermal clothing, the wetsuit, and we're going to hike through some canyon. That's fine. I've done that before. What I didn't expect that right out of the gate, we'd be jumping 10 or 15 feet into a pool of water. I thought, oh,
To be fair, you jumped 10, 15 feet into the water. I got down more slowly.
That's fair. And that's good to point out to people, too, that you have that option to go safely without risking life and limb. And it just takes you off guard that there's not a waiver and insurance and all the things that we go through in the United States typically, or there's handrails and whatnot. And it did take me a moment's preparation of, you don't have to do it. I'm like, just give me a second here. I am grouping my brain and analyzing what I'm about to do. But once I got through that, there's a fear factor, there's a thrill factor to that, but it was gorgeous. The experience was awesome. I would probably do it again, but it would have been nice to have a little bit of mental preparation. But maybe I would have backed out. I don't know. But that was phenomenal. And then once all the challenges were done, it was just beauty from there on out.
Yeah.
And floating on your back in this gorgeous clear water, turquoise water canyon through sandstone. That was remarkable. I'll never forget that.
I think one thing I would have done differently is they were concerned that my glasses would cause a safety issue. I think if I had brought a glasses strap and I have my polycarbonate lenses, which are actually safety glasses, I would have done it with my sunglasses because I was semi-blind as I was going down this river, and I think I would have enjoyed it more if I could have seen more of what was going on. I'm not completely blind, but that's one thing that I would do differently next time. And I say next time because it was fun. And I do have to give out a shout out to Jorge because it was fun because he figured out so many of the things we needed. I will put a link to his website if you're looking for guide help in Aragon. Then Rutica41 is his website, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. We were not done with the fun yet. We went over then to the beautiful mountain town of Alcazar. And this is the town that Cathy and I were talking about that nearly died. It really didn't have very many students left in the schools, but was then saved 50 years ago by French tourism and tourism that were doing the canyoneering, doing the hiking, doing even via ferratas in the area. But it is an old town that is set up on a hill that is quite old. It was a Moorish town at one point. It was captured by the Christians in 1067. And the most picturesque town, I think, that we saw on the trip. We went to a restaurant for lunch there, and the restaurant was Maison del Vero, and it was a brasserie, and those are not Spanish words, but again, French tourists are coming here, and so they're appealing to those French tourists. And it was a very nice lunch, and we ate outside on the lip of this canyon because the city sits up on a series of rocks with a fortified church on an even higher rock. But this area has a drop off and just this gorgeous view of a valley below it. We had a chance then to check into our hotel, I think also the prettiest hotel that we stayed at on this trip. And this was the boutique hotel Mirabel. Now, Mirabel does not have elevators, so it's boutique and cute, but you do have to carry your suitcases up the stairs. I took one of the rooms on the top floors because I travel light and let those with more luggage take the lower floors. But we had just done a canyoning experience, and those stairs were a little work. I took a nap after lunch there, trying to recover from the exertion of the canyoning. And then we did a guided tour of this gorgeous town of Alcazar with someone from the tourism board and with an English-speaking guide there. We had a chance to go into a home that's been preserved by the family with things that were left over from the old days, like a loom and an olive press in the basement. Multiple different neighbors would get together and press their olives together. We saw a number of different small chapels, more than you would think you would need for a town that has barely enough students right now, 5, to keep their elementary school open. Saw features of the town where you can see that there were peepholes, for instance, not in the doors, but in the second floor, or what they would call the first floor in Spain, to look down on the people who were knocking on their door, because the ground floor would have been the business and the people would have been upstairs in the family home. And then also at one place there were animal hooves above the door, and often the different what was displayed above the door gave you an idea what business they were in. But in this case, that was because they were good luck charms. So they were basically protecting you from evil with these animal hooves, which obviously didn't protect the animal. So I don't know how that works exactly. We stopped for a dobladillo del alcazar, which is an interesting pastry that they make here. Very unique, somewhat savory, but still sweet with some anise flavor to it. They had stopped making it because the last bakery that made it had gone out of business, but a family moved to the area. And because they reopened the bakery, one of the children of the old bakers gave them the recipe, this secret recipe for this traditional pastry. So if you go to Panaderia Reposteria o Forno, you can try this. They have a great big sign in the window, so you can't miss it once you're there. There are a number of different trails that go down from the town, loop around, and then come back up again. One does have to be careful because it's quite a warm area. It was quite warm when we were there. So if you're there in the summertime, you do need to take appropriate water. You need to make sure that you're ready for whatever environment you're going to run into. And you probably want to do that hike early in the morning. The guide that we were with is one of those who has to sometime go rescue people off the trail who do not listen to their warnings about making sure you have enough water and go early in the morning. He was telling us a story of a family that was hiking in pouring rain, and they were doing it because they had asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said it wasn't going to rain. Well, that's kind of like listening to this podcast as it's predicting the weather, because the way ChatGPT works is its information is encoded when they train it, so it's not the best place to ask for daily weather, and I would encourage you not to do that. But I love the little town of Alcazar with its beautiful little narrow paths. We did not get up and into the old fortified church there. If we'd had more time, I would love to do that and to do the hiking, but we were just a little tired that day. That night we had one of our best meals at the restaurant Cueva Reina, the Queen's Cave, I think. And the owners of this restaurant, Felipe and Concha, or Felipe Bagnon y Concepcion Martí Sanchez, left an impression on us. I'll let Kevin tell you about that.
And then our last meal was very memorable. The food was great, but it was just the situation where we're in Alcázar, the village, in a restaurant that's overlooking a canyon. And it's not jam-packed, and they're bringing out food for all of us to share. It's a set menu, and it's stuff that looks like they're trying to serve you in the way that they would at a Michelin star restaurant. I don't mean to mock that.
Yeah.
They're just presenting it nicely. It's thoughtful, creative dishes and recipes. And then the owners are this couple, this remarkable couple that met when he was going to get his car fixed, which I thought was just a hilarious story. Wait, so the cook is your wife who's an auto mechanic? That's fantastic. So that was just charming, and all the food was really good and well put together. And I just thought, what an incredible change of field that was for her to go from auto mechanic to chef, whereas our guide in the canyon went from chef to adventure guide. Just interesting people along the way, and that always makes the experience a little bit better.
And that was really our trip. The next day we got up and we got in a van and drove down to the Barcelona airport, or to Barcelona for those of us who were staying a little longer. And so we get to some of the wrap-up questions. First, I had a bonus question for Kevin. One thing that surprised you about Aragon?
I guess what surprised me is many of the things that I missed after the trip, or before the trip too, just looking up things that are there. Because sometimes you get on these trips that are to some obscure place. Particularly, there's a lot of American trips that are in the United States where you end up in a town, you're like, oh my God, how am I going to tell people to go here? And Aragon could have been that kind of place, but it was definitely not. There's these monasteries that I didn't know about, the ones we saw, the ones we didn't see. The more you get in touch with Aragon, the more you realize that, oh, if I go a step further, there's even more I could experience here. And the food was great. The wine was great. I just really.
And cheap.
And cheap. My God, yeah, the prices.
I couldn't get over that as someone who lives out here in wine country. So.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's, I think, the shock of a lot of places in Europe when you get there. And you might be familiar with some of these wines, but at the liquor store, they're, $20, $30, $40. And here it's like €8. What? That can't be right. Is this the same wine or? Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You were shopping in the shop
yes.
too in Zaragoza to bring things home.
I purchased the world's best vermouth, according to 2 contest wins over the past 5 years.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was nice.
And then Cathy also had some thoughts on our itinerary. What else should people not miss when they go to Aragon?
Zaragoza, I'm writing about it as a fabulous detour destination. So if you're looking to avoid the crowded capital cities in Europe, Zaragoza has it all. It's got soaring cathedrals.
Cathedrals, plural. Yeah.
Plural, yep. The 2, you can't get more bang for your buck than going to the Plaza de Pilar and visiting those 2 cathedrals. Liceo, it's a Catholic cathedral standing on top of a Roman forum on top of an Islamic mosque. You're not getting more history anywhere else, in my opinion. And the food and wine is fantastic, the museums, and UNESCO designations. So you're really getting everything you could possibly want in a European city. And value pricing. I think we found our meals, lunches, 3-course lunches, you're getting for €22 with wine, and fabulous gourmet dinners, 3 courses again for under €50. It's value pricing.
Excellent. Anything surprised you about Aragon in general?
Surprising? I've been to Spain before, and everybody talks about getting around Spain via the train system, which again is fabulous. It's high speed. Yeah. I really think Aragon as a road trip destination is the way to do it. I think that renting a car, the Spanish highways are magnificently modern and well-maintained and well-signed, and it gives you that opportunity. You see a medieval village up on a hilltop, pull off and go.
Or a little castle as we visited.
Exactly correct, because you can see it all from the highways, and that's how I road trip, is I see a brown sign or something interesting in the distance, and off I go. So I think Aragon is a place that reveals itself visually. It is worth doing the dive. We ran into those honeymooners at the winery, and they were doing that kind of a drive about, and I think that's a wonderful way to explore Aragon.
And we had some agreement from Kevin here as well. Any other answers you've got that I just didn't ask the right question to get?
Just thinking of Aragon as a road trip sort of place. We were obviously on tours, and I think a lot of people will travel that way when they get there. But I think it is a place where it'd be nice to have your own car and rent it and stop at the roadside to watch the river flow through the canyon and that sort of thing, and then head out to a winery on a whim. I think it'd be good for that.
You and Cathy said the same thing. That is interesting. I agree, but it's just interesting you both picked up on that.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously you could get away with not doing that in most of Spain, all of it really. But I do find that Spain has got a lot of great road trips, and this would be definitely one of them. I've done the North Shore, and that's a great ride too. But this would be great, going from the city up into the mountains and off into some of those monasteries on the flat areas. So,
and then our traditional last questions. You're standing in the prettiest spot in all of Aragon. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Ooh, in all of Aragon.
That we saw.
It's got to be that. Boy, that's tough because, oh gosh, you have to pin me down on one thing, huh? Probably that mountain view. It's constantly changing as the clouds move and the shafts of light from the sun peek through, and then you've got what looks to be a storm cloud rising over another peak over there in the distance. It's a constant show. So that definitely was the best or tied for it. I did love the canyon with that water. I think that was gorgeous. I would have noticed it more if I wasn't terrified, though.
You're standing in the prettiest spot in Aragon. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
That's the easiest one for me. I wasn't sleeping well at the beginning of our trip, so I was getting up early after being reassured by everyone how wonderfully safe Zaragoza was as a city.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I went out just as dawn was breaking and walked over to the Plaza del Pilar and watched as the dawn light was bathing the cathedral facades. And the only sound I heard was the cooing of the pigeons. It was magnificent. My photos don't do it justice, but it's all upstairs and will stay with me for a lifetime. So I suggest sacrificing a little bit of sleep and walking the old town of Zaragoza in pre-dawn or post-dawn.
And then because Kevin and Cathy chose what they did, that still leaves me to talk about the town of Alcazar, which was amazingly gorgeous. And then also standing in that castle that was left over from the 1100s was amazing. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Aragon.
Oh, man. Okay. I would say having to jump out of the vehicle to get in front of it and shepherd the sheep off of the path so we could drive to the top of the mountain.
That's right.
Because there's no shepherd around, so you have to fill in. It's a DIY.
Your part-time job as shepherd as we went up to the Pyrenees. I'd forgotten about that. Excellent.
That was fun.
And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Aragon.
I love that everybody speaks English with their wonderful Castilian accents and embracing.
At least everybody in the tourism industry that we were running to.
Everybody, again, you're walking through that vocal cloud that is Spanish, but everybody you're engaging with is speaking English, but they're beautiful accents. You have to listen with intent and context, right, to get the information. When we were in the winery and our guide was describing the need for the wire cages, and she was grasping for pop to keep the wine from popping.
Right.
Instead she gave us, so the wine doesn't go, woohoo. And it was such a wonderful moment. And that became for me the go-to phrase for everything that was delightful about Aragon. I'm still using woohoo when I'm happy. It was great. What a wonderful trip. It was really, again, off the beaten path is such a cliche, but it is wonderfully undiscovered by Americans. I think only about 50,000 head to the region. And I need to confirm that. But yeah, it's one that's flying under the radar, but worth your time.
And before I get to the last question, let me pause and thank Alba from the Tourism Office of Spain, who was with us, and then also the two traveling companions you didn't hear from, Pamela Dietmar McEwen from alltherightplaces.com and Max Hartshorn from GoNomad.com, who's been on the show before. I didn't leave them off because they weren't interesting, but I just thought two voices would be the right amount. And I appreciate Kevin and Cathy because it's wonderful having articulate guests and it's great having great travel companions. And if I had to summarize the region of Aragon in 3 words, I would say history. You have to say history. And anytime that you're talking about towns that are 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old, the Roman forums and all those sorts of things, history has to come up. I feel like wine was definitely a theme of this particular trip where we were doing the wine cooking class and we went to wineries and such. That has to be one. But I have to save the last one for canyoneering because that was the memorable experience. And thanks to Tourism Spain and the region of Aragon for inviting us there for this wonderful experience. Special thanks also to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Remember, there are still spaces available for the Bolivia trip in May of 2027. I hope I can see you there. I'm going to have a great time with whoever comes with me. I heard recently from Catherine, who wrote me and said, "Hello, Chris. My name is Catherine. I'm a regular listener to your Amateur Traveler podcast. I recently came across an episode on Kumanokoto and hiking in Japan. This episode inspired me to plan a trip to Japan, which included the multi-day hike of Nakahechi Trail in the Kumano region. It was a beautiful hike, and I was impressed by the hospitality and kindness of the local people. Your other interviews on Tokyo and Osaka were also incredibly helpful in highlighting some areas of the cities worth visiting on a trip with limited time. Thank you very much for doing this show. It is very informative, inspirational, and well-suited to us North American travelers who have limited vacation time. I'm attaching a picture of us at Kumano Nachi Taisha Grand Shrine at the end of our hike. I really appreciate your work, and without it, would never have known about multi-day hikes in Japan. Thank you, Catherine. And thanks, Catherine. That is so encouraging to know that somebody is using the podcast for its intended use to inspire them to do travel. If anybody else has been inspired to go someplace because of Amateur Traveler, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com as Catherine did, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
I'm David Pryor, a travel writer and founder of the travel company Pryor. I'm inspired by places, but also curious about people.
I was 19 years old. It was fantastic.
It is so foreign, and it felt so apocalyptic.
So here I am talking to culture makers about their stories, what they've discovered on the road, and trying to understand the nature of their curiosity.
Talk about where I saw culture for the first time.
That mushroom tart, it was like sex.
This is a show about how travel informs the story of our lives. This is Traveling Through. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.